All righty. We're about a minute past the hour. We'll go ahead and get started. Looks like we have a nice group with us already. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We'll hop right in and I'll begin by quickly introducing myself. My name is Julie Holkebor. I am the Marketing Communications Manager here at Rebel Systems. And I'm thrilled to be introducing the session today. We have two industry leaders joining us spanning the restaurant and hospitality industries. And if you could advance to the next slide for me. And I'll let each of the speakers tell you a little bit more about themselves in just a bit here, but I will quickly introduce them. We have with us Dorothy Creamer, the Research Manager, Hospitality and Travel Digital Transformation Strategies at IDC. And she's joined by AJ Dumas, the Senior IT Manager at Erbert and Gerbert. And with these two on the call, I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. We'll focus on just how important it is to have the right technology in place to not only remain flexible, but also succeed in an environment that's constantly changing today. I'm sure it's a topic that's close to home for many of you on the call today. So I think the pandemic also really accelerated this claim. So I know AJ and Dorothy have some great examples to share. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to AJ and he'll share a little bit more about Erberts and Gerberts and what makes it such a popular sandwich destination today.
Thank you. Yep, my name is AJ. I'm the Senior IT Manager at Erbert and Gerbert's. I've been here for about 13 years. Erbert and Gerbert's is a sandwich shop that started in a college town in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is about an hour and a half away from Minneapolis to try and put it on the map somewhere. It started off on Water Street, which was right next to the campus, and it grew ever since. And we're now up to about 50 what we call traditional stores and 30 non-traditional, which would be in, directly in college campuses or airports or other places. So we're really happy to be on here, and hopefully we can share some insights.
Great. Thanks so much, AJ. Thank you, Julie, for that great introduction as well. I'm just a really quick intro. I'm Dorothy Creamer. I'm the Research Manager for Hospitality and Travel Digital Transformation Strategies at IDC. I hail from the media side. I was the editor-in-chief for Hospitality Technology magazine for many years. So have followed the transformation that has been happening in restaurants and hotels throughout my career. And as Julie also mentioned, the impact of COVID, I actually started with IDC right as the pandemic was really ripping through the globe, ripping across the globe. So we've really watched this acceleration of change that has happened. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation today to hear that on the ground, boots on the ground perspective from a fantastic operator. But so to get the conversation started, I think it would be great just to kind of review the status of the situation that restaurants found themselves in around February, March of last year of 2020. The impact of COVID definitely, had ripple effects that took shape in many forms. In those initial days, there was a lot of just fear, uncertainty, a lot of closures and lockdowns that were happening across the country. This was very diverse across the globe. It was, there was not a lot of consistency. It was always very different, the reactions in various parts. So for global companies, they had a very different take because there were those regional differences. IDC did some consumer surveys at two separate points during the pandemic. But what we did see happening was that in those early days of COVID-19, the concern levels were very high, where more than half were concerned or very concerned. What happened in those early days was that everything shifted to takeout and delivery. There was and those were the only options available. As we moved through the pandemic, and hit that September timeframe, even though people were still getting a little bit more accustomed to this new normal and how they were going to be able to interact with their favorite brands, that concern level of contracting the virus was still relatively high. We did not see that go down. So there was still that level of hesitancy to return to quote unquote normal, which then it impacted the fact that consumers were very accustomed to and looking for options that would be contactless, that would allow them to distance themselves from crowded restaurants. And the second part to this, or the second component, is really that it became the ease of interacting with brands that consumers were looking for. We see on the retail side, huge numbers in e-commerce and having goods delivered from a retail perspective. And we saw that also on the restaurant side as well. So just to chart where we see these, where we saw sales, this is overall restaurant data from US data from the US Census Bureau. And we saw that obviously that large drop off in sales for restaurants happening during, in the throes of the pandemic in 2020, and that was definitely depressed. But what we saw in 2021 happening is a large rebound, where now the sales are actually over what those sales were pre-COVID. And so this pent-up demand, people are ready to get back out there. They're also ordering more because they are turning to digital channels to order. And this has been a talking point for years with a strong e-commerce strategy. We see sales higher than what is from in-person sales. So we definitely see that that reflected in these sales numbers. On a limited service or QSRs, fast casual brands, it was well reported and talked about that throughout the pandemic, those brands were slightly better positioned because of their digital maturity, and they were already well positioned to shift to digital first omni-channel routes, whereas full service and fine dining obviously had their they had a little bit more difficult time shifting to contactless operations and really making the case for that. But QSRs and fast casuals, really the line, did not dip off as severely as restaurants totally did. But still, we see that green line from 2021 higher than ever. So there's just that a lot of digital transformation definitely accelerated, but now there's also that increased demand that we're seeing. So that's enough for me for just a moment. I definitely want to hear from AJ and talk a little bit about how where E&G was, Erbert and Gerbert's was positioned prior to the pandemic, where you viewed yourself in that digital transformation journey, just to kind of give a sense of where you were heading into that, and then how that shifted in those early days of the pandemic. But if you can kind of give us an overview of a description of, in terms of how you were digitally positioned pre-pandemic, and then what those early days looked like as you might have had to make some adjustments.
Sure. Yeah. I would say that E&G was in pretty good shape. We are a restaurant brand that has been self-delivery from the beginning, and we had already positioned ourselves with a cloud-based POS system. So that was something that was able to allow us to make changes rapidly through our stores as we need to continue to adapt to what was happening. We also had already moved our online ordering and gotten into a good, solid partner with that. And we also had a pretty solid partner with our loyalty and rewards program. So we had all of the pieces really in place. And then it was really just kind of trying to adapt, see what our stores were seeing, see what the governments and the local municipalities were saying, and get everything to, kind of be there to support all of that as we saw the situation changing.
Great, excellent. I'm glad that you brought up, obviously the point of sale is kind of a starting point, and moving to delivery, and that all needs to be integrated. Were there any changes early on, or that you had to change, or were you prioritizing more of them in those days, or was it an acceleration of what was already in place? What did the evolution have to look like to gain that ground, continue? You were already in a good position, to maybe further as other competitors were accelerating their offerings in the e-commerce space or delivery space. How did you maintain that positive trajectory with your technology partners?
So, for us, it came to, we have self-delivery, so we wanted to make sure we definitely can lean into that. The partners that we have allowed us to be able to quickly adapt our delivery areas, to expand as we needed to be able to kind of catch more of the people that we normally wouldn't have said we're going to meet our operational expectations. And we also worked hand in hand with our online ordering partner to get curbside implemented quickly. how can we identify the stores? How do the guests know that curbside is available? What can we do to reassure them that everything is going to be a contactless situation? And then one of the other things that came probably, in that more summer of 2020 timeframe was started to see shortages in terms of supplies, what we could get from our deliveries from our food distributors. And for that, again, having that cloud-based POS system allowed us to make changes rapidly, globally across all of our stores, right from our corporate office, as well as adapt those changes to what we had available online. And then now that we've kind of gotten, for the most part, out of the thick of the pandemic, now it's been really about staffing and what can we do to help increase our drivers, especially, and what can we do to make the driver process as efficient as possible. So those are kind of the things that we've done to adapt since this whole thing began.
Great. And you brought up a couple interesting points with the COVID related challenges that emerged, especially we saw it with supply chain. When you consider the technology stack that you have, and you've mentioned already how a few of them have already helped with those challenges. Can you talk a little bit about how that technology stack has helped change with those specific challenges, supply chain being a great example, but then also from the franchisee's perspective, getting franchise buy-in a lot of times for the technology is a struggle. How do you handle getting the buy-in on the technology and making sure that everyone's utilizing the technology stack to the best of its capabilities and in the appropriate way to foster the business?
Sure. E&G is a franchise company, so we have about 50 traditional locations, and out of those, we have just a handful that are corporate. So we are very respectful and understanding that each of these franchisees are independent business owners, and they probably got into a restaurant because they want to make food and they want to make people happy, not necessarily because they're technology people. So when we have a cloud-based system like the Revel POS system that we have the ability to do a lot of the management, a lot of that kind of grudge work inside our own corporate office, and we can just kind of deploy that out to the stores and try and keep it as smooth from their standpoint as possible. That also means that when it comes to these changes and these changes happening rapidly, we can do that in a central place and make the pushes as appropriate to the group of stores that makes sense to, even to the point where we actually now allow for stores to basically make requests for changes based on what they're seeing on the ground themselves. So those types of things are things that give us a little bit more credibility to the value that we bring to those franchisees and how the technology is actually assisting us. Because a lot of times technology also has equal stories of being frustrating. And so we really try to do our best to keep it on the positive side.
That's a great and a really interesting point we talk so much, and this slide we'll get into a little bit more about how, the user experience for guests and that relationship is obviously such an important factor, but the user experience of employees, and especially as we're in a time where there's a labor crisis, there's, people, there's fewer workers coming back or retain or being able to retain those workers. Can you talk specifically about how the technology that the Revel system is user friendly in terms of that? If there is high turnover, what are the benefits to that? The user-friendly capabilities of being on the Apple platform, the Apple operating system.
Yeah, I mean the system we have for our point of sale is Revel. It's a cloud-based system. It's based on Apple ecosystem infrastructure, and that gives us a lot of benefits. We first of all have peace of mind because the Apple systems are extremely secure. Also, they're very intuitive. So we hear this time and again from our franchisees. They'll get the staffing in place, and it's like they already partially know how to do everything because they're very accustomed to how well Apple sets up their devices and really how well Revel works on their user interface. So we do have a lot of turnover, especially these days with people coming in, going out, having a little bit of concern about whether they should be working in a restaurant type of environment. And also for our managers, for them to be able to kind of go through and make sure that they can keep everybody up to speed on things. Having that kind of a system in place just makes that process that much easier. And we certainly continually look to improve that, as does Revel. Revel has actually been, especially this last year, very open with getting our thoughts, opinions, and feedback on the changes that they are proactively making on their platform. I was actually just in a webinar with a group of their product developers just this week, asking for input on how we can better manage things, particularly from a global standpoint.
Great. And I think that's really key here is some of these data points that I pulled out from the QSR side, from the restaurant side, is that a slightly more than a quarter of restaurant operators are really letting this current situation drive their innovation. And we saw, that everyone talked about how digital transformation suddenly was accelerated, that this can happen quickly, even though we always said in the past, oh, it takes, these rollouts take a long time, but there's this acceleration. And a lot of that is just because the demand was actually there. And so the innovation followed the necessity that was put out into the marketplace. But the other interesting thing is that the largest portions of kind of the strategy around innovation is not necessarily the flashy, disruptive things that we might imagine. It very much is, we want to improve the operations, make the basics better, but without ripping apart our entire operating strategy and the way we operate, but while still upping our innovation game. And I think we see that here with this information here. And then when we look at where those innovation priorities are kind of bubbling up, it kind of aligns with that theme that the customer experiences are really the bottom line, where that needs to be focused, and really making sure that's where the focus is. With Erbert and Gerbert's, kind of a guest first mentality, while still having a very, kind of how are we going to address the basics first? Can you talk a little bit about how, some of those ways that you've seen the shift, or some where you have had to make some extra drivers to increase the omni-channel business and loyalty, and especially, translating that throughout the franchisees as well?
Sure. When we look at this, as I mentioned, we're in pretty good shape with a lot of these factors. And the things that we have focused on are kind of like what you mentioned. We want to make sure that as we're, building back up, post-COVID here, or, in the last part of COVID, that we really want to focus in on those internal operations. And how can our POS and our technology stack help us do that? Thankfully, the POS provider we have, Revel, has an open system. They give us the ability to give feedback to them about things that we'd like to see them do, but also be able to get access to their open and well-documented APIs to do things that maybe are more important to us than maybe is important to them at this point. That gives us a lot of flexibility to drive things like, how are we going to report on our inventory and our labor in a way that's very specific to our brand? How are we going to lay out product planners so that our staff, which is, changing frequently, is more informed about what they need to do to prepare for the next day and the next week? What can we do to adapt to those situations where the deliveries that we were expecting in terms of food or product aren't necessarily going to come, and what can we do to adapt that in the store in terms of preparation, but also how to then also make those changes quickly in both our online ordering and our in-app ordering platforms. All of those things are things that we're focused on, and our partners are really helping us with. One that we're actually adapting to right now, and really getting towards the end of, is being a self-delivery brand. When a lot of the restaurants, had this COVID happen, they looked to find ways, how can we get, delivery into our set? And we were already in a great position to do that. But we are actually now moving more into third party than we initially intended, largely due to COVID, because we want to make sure that we're able to capture the guests that happen to be in those kind of marketplaces, or that end up, shifting to those marketplaces because of the environment these days. And so some of the innovation that we're looking for, Revel and other of our partners to assist with, is how we can intelligently move between our self-delivery and these third-party deliveries, depending on the availability of staff, drivers, in particular. So those are the types of things that we're working on now that are really seeming to be beneficial to both our franchisees and to our guests.
Right, that's fantastic. And, I think you make a great point that it's we saw this on the hotel side with the OTAs and having hotels listed across online travel agents, which was this wonderful, kind of opening of possibilities to get in front of customers that you didn't even know were out there. But now we're seeing this with the delivery, the third parties, is how do you maintain your ownership of those guests if they started out as a Grubhub or another one of the third party delivery providers. And so, if you can extrapolate upon that, the need for those integrations really quickly, so that how are you then utilizing your partners to integrate the data together so that you can make the marketing decisions to now bring them back as perhaps, drive those direct sales again? Is that part of the strategy and the conversations?
Right. Yeah. When it comes to third party, was something that we were a little bit reluctant to do and felt like, we really probably don't need to do that. But the more we looked at it, it ends up being a benefit to our franchisees. So that's definitely something we pushed into. In regards to pulling back on these, we have conversations with the three primary platforms that we have in our system, which is DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Grubhub. I have conversations with them sometimes almost weekly. And we're talking about what we're doing to onboard our stores, what we're doing to improve, the integration of both the order injection, which is critical, but also the menu management in terms of, if you had one menu you were managing in your POS, and now you have another menu because you have an online ordering provider, well, now you have plus another three because you have all these independent third parties. You got to keep track of, how much do you have time to manage all that. And E&G is a relatively small company. There is a tech group of 2 people. It's me as well as one of my partners here, and that's it. So we have to be able to come up with efficient ways to do all these things. We have a partner that does an aggregation or an integration with all those third parties, and then we have Revel, as I'd mentioned, as that source for everything. So Revel ends up being able to push out to both our online as well as out to this integrator, who then can push out to the third parties. It's a lot of plumbing to set up in place, so it's a little bit front end loaded, but boy, you can certainly gain the benefits of it when you need to make rapid changes, and those can go out to 5, 6 separate menus almost simultaneously.
Great.
With regards to the guests, you had talked about how do we retain the guests. I got a little bit off track there. When we talk to these partners, I would say that the third parties are also trying to adapt, and I get the sense of that when we talk to them. And some of them are openly saying, "Hey, we want you to be able to, have more input on what's going on with those stores." I think some of the third parties are seeing how they can become a little bit more of a partner, particularly in the idea of staffing and how they can actually assist us with that. And they seem like they're maybe turning a corner a little bit and being a little bit more open with the guests that they're capturing. When this first started, they were very protective of the guests that were inside of their systems. To me, it seems like they're opening that up just a little bit and just trying to test the waters with giving us a little bit more access.
Absolutely. And, and I think that's also, and you alluded to it, the need for those integrations and that flexibility. We see that here with about a third of restaurants admitting that that's a high priority to have, locked up by 2022. I think that might actually be more accelerated. And then if we look out for those business objectives, not surprisingly, it's led by increasing revenue, but also by making sure that the employee experience is improved. And I think that speaks to what we were talking about earlier about that ease of use and just how easy the systems within your organization are to use and make everyone empowered to make the most of them. I want to make sure that we have time for a couple questions, but really quick, since we were talking about that flexibility, and I know you've built solutions in-house, you've and integrated it into your POS, and then just kind of buying off the shelf. Can you talk a little bit about that build versus buy strategy, especially being a smaller organization, and what are those considerations that you take around when issues do arise, and how have you grappled with that?
Certainly, yeah, it's something that we talk about, and thankfully with Revel's open API, we can have that conversation. Should we build? Should we buy? We're a franchise company, so anytime we look at buying, we are very consciously thinking of what the burden is going to be to our franchisees in terms of, additional subscription fees, additional overhead for them as they go forward. When we get a buy situation, we know we're going to have likely a polished product from a subject matter expert that we've already evaluated and said is best in class, and that they're going to fully support what's going on there. So those are some benefits on the buy side. But on the build side, we have usually a upfront capital expense in terms of the development. And then after that, the support is really on us. And we don't necessarily have to pass any of those kind of costs on to our franchisees. And we can use that, and it is absolutely tailor fit for us. So you're right. For certain things out of our core stack, so if our core stack is POS, online, loyalty, rewards, and payment processing, outside of that core stack, we're very interested in what we can build ourselves, whether that's from additional inventory management, additional, global menu management from our own internal database, or potentially even things that we can do to, push out to our loyalty platform in a way that we are actually segmenting. All those things are, we definitely consider the build to be a little bit, preferable to us.
Great. Excellent. No, thank you for that. I think we are just have some time for a few questions, and they are coming through. One question that we got from the audience is what you are doing and the adjustments you've made applicable to 2-store mom and pop segment types.
I would say that maybe not as much, from the standpoint that if you're working with a limited number of stores and possibly the same menu across both of those, having a good POS partner that is cloud-based is beneficial, but that seems like something that you might be able to just, manage yourself. And so as long as you have a good solid POS system that you can use and adapt to those, I think that would be fine. It's when you start getting into that, 5 range where if you're not cloud-based, you really should be. On the really small set, cloud-based is really going to give you the benefit of those integrations. I want to add online ordering. I want to add a loyalty rewards. I want to add, a various amount of different payment processors or third-party delivery platforms. Cloud-based just makes a lot of that really easier.
And I would have a quick follow-on question to that then myself is with, when we talked about the migration to cloud, and we feel like this has already happened. But did you lean? Is the Erbert and Gerbert's cloud strategy across the board, or were you really being led by your technology partners in that migration?
I will say that I've actually been a very big fan of cloud for quite a while. So we had moved to cloud and actually had listed that as one of our top requirements when we were POS shopping. Back around the 2016, 2015 timeframe. Cloud was one of the things that we wanted to make sure was included. We didn't certainly predict, something like a COVID, but we did predict that we wanted that kind of global management, flexibility, scalability, and ability to bring partners on easily.
Right. We have a couple more questions coming in. Did you find this? Well, the question is, how do you convince customers to order online versus face-to-face or telephone? Has that been have you needed to kind of make the case for it, or did that happen organically? And how do you convince them to move to those channels?
I think the real convincing, it does happen pretty much organically. We have a strong marketing department, and our loyalty and rewards partner is Punch, and they have a very strong social media integration that they can all make use of to drive people towards something that is faster, more convenient. And so once people see that faster and more convenient, that's where they really want to go. So our job on the tech side of things is really to make sure that process is streamlined. And after we do that, word of mouth seems to take care of making sure that everybody else is following suit, after the fact.
Great. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. What changes that emerged as priorities for pivoting in response to the pandemic? What of those have remained relevant as the environment continues to shift? We talk a lot about how these changes are remaining, but correct me if I'm wrong, or have you noticed any changes happening or evolving?
Yeah, I mean, the changes for us are primarily supply of product and supply of people. Staffing and our food that we are getting delivered, those are the things that we on almost a daily basis, see changes. And those are the places that we really still work out what we can do to make that experience better, primarily for our franchisees. It's tough when you're adapting to saying, hey, here's my normal menu that my staff's already trained to do, and now I'm missing pieces of that menu. How do I, take a guest that just always loves that Bony Billy sandwich and maybe need to move them into someplace else? That ends up being a little bit challenging from a training standpoint. We just want to make sure that the guest can see those options as they're going into the online. And in terms of staffing, that's kind of what I talked about before. Our drivers are some of the most sought after piece in here, and so giving us a streamlined system to make it pleasant and enjoyable for them while they're in our system. But if we need to be able to use the third parties as a backup, being able to make sure that that integration is seamless from a guest standpoint and really also from the store standpoint, those are the things that we continue to work on improving.
And I'm going to squeeze one final question in, just because I think talking about that omni-channel frictionless experience for the guest, and this is an interesting point. Have you integrated your loyalty payment on Revel kiosk to accept a third payment besides credit or cashier? And maybe to kind of talk about your strategy around that, those sorts of touch points and payment.
Yeah, so right now ENG does not use a kiosk method. We've been looking at it for several years. Haven't really seen the adoption in the rest of the industry that would make us want to move towards that. In terms of payments, we make use of a payment processor that is directly integrated with Revel and also integrated with our online ordering. And the third parties actually make use of their own payment processor. So our payments really haven't needed to do a lot to adapt. It is something that we actually are working on currently to improve in terms of the online ordering, because we want to get that to be what we call an inline payment set. A lot of times you'll get a redirect over to whoever the payment processor is. So that's something we're doing to try and make that a little bit more streamlined for our guests. But other than that, the actual act of doing it is already set up thanks to how Revel has their payment processing set up.
Great. Excellent. Well, I think we have run out of time, so I'm going to pass it back over to Julie just to do some final wrap-up commentary. But thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. AJ, Dorothy, thank you so much for your time and expertise today. And if we didn't get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you personally. We appreciate you submitting them. And have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.